Here. Okay, and so we're going to welcome Courtney. Courtney and I haven't met before, but Courtney is from the zoo. Maybe I'll let you introduce yourself before we get going. Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, guys. So my name's Courtney. I am the education specialist at the Henry Vilas Zoo. And I have some education animals with me today that I'd love to introduce you to. So these are all animals that we have in our education collection. So they're used to being around people and they're used to being handled. So they're a little bit smaller critters. I don't have any tigers with me today because that really wouldn't be super safe. So a couple little critters, but they're really amazing and they have a lot of awesome stories to tell. So I'll be sharing them today. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to ask. At any point, you can type it in the chat or you can just raise your hand and I can call on you. But yeah, feel free to ask questions at any point. I'm going to start off with our smallest critter. Now, this is a critter that a lot of people, when they first meet him, they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know about that. But once you get to know him, he's pretty great. Let me get him out here. Right. So this is my friend Beethoven. And Beethoven is a giant, or a Madagascar hissing cockroach. So his name is Beethoven because he's a decomposer. So as an animal who likes to eat things that are dead and rotten and mushy, he actually helps the whole ecosystem, the whole forest, just by existing and being there. So even though he is really small, he is super important because as things die, so think about all the leaves that fall in the ground or the plants that die or the fruit that get all rotten and mushy and gross that animals really won't eat. That is what his favorite food is. So that's what he likes to eat up. And when things fall on the ground and they're kind of stuck in that plant form, there's a lot of nutrients in there that are just kind of stuck. Nothing else can use them. Other animals don't want to eat them and it can't go into the soil because it's still all bound up in that plant. So what Beethoven does is he uses his little tiny mouth parts. So he actually can't eat a lot of fresh things. So he's not really in competition with other animals who want to eat fresh leaves or fresh fruit. His mouth parts aren't strong enough to chew that up. So he's only eating the dead mushy things. But as he eats it, when he poops it back out, it becomes fertilizer for the soil. He can break down the plant material and release a lot of those nutrients and important things back into the soil so that the plants are able to grow. And when the plants are able to grow, the animals that eat the plants are able to grow. And when animals who eat plants are able to grow, animals who eat plant-eating animals are able to grow. And the whole ecosystem benefits from this little guy. So even though he might seem small, him and his buddies are so important. And these guys live in a big colony, so they all hang out together. They're pretty social. So he's by himself right now, but he has some friends back in the education room that he'll hang out with all the time. And you'll notice I'm saying he, so I do know that he is a boy because he has these little horns on his head. So you can see those little bumpies? They kind of look like his eyes, but they're not his eyes. If you look really closely at his little head underneath, he's got teeny tiny eyes under there, kind of near his antenna. But those little bumps kind of serve as antlers. So he's a big, strong male cockroach, and he wants everybody to know it. So he can use those antlers to push off other males, to show off to all the lady cockroaches and say, look at how big and strong I am. So those horns actually have a pretty good function. You can also see, to get a good look at his little head, you can see those mouth parts, and you can see his antenna that are moving around. So he kind of senses the world primarily with his antenna. So just like how when you enter a new room, you kind of just survey what's going on. You want to know where you're at, if you're safe, all of that good stuff. So that's what he's doing all the time. He's kind of feeling out in front of him and figuring out where he is and if he's safe. So it's kind of like if you imagine yourself in a dark hallway and you're like reaching to make sure that you're like walking in the right direction, but also your hand could taste and smell everything. So his antenna do a whole lot for him. But like I said, he does have eyes, so he can kind of see light and dark. He can't really make out too great of pictures. And he does have kind of a modified form of an ear, so he can hear things. And it's important for him to be able to hear things because that's actually how they communicate. So I said before, he's a Madagascar hissing cockroach. So you can probably guess that he lives on the island of Madagascar, the coast of southern Africa, and that he can hiss. which he does. So they'll hiss for a couple different reasons. Primarily, they'll hiss when they're feeling scared or nervous to warn off predators. So if I was a monkey and I was going to pick up this bug and I was going to eat it, and all of a sudden it made a really loud tss at me, I'd go, ah, and I'd drop it, and then I could skitter away. So it's actually a really effective way to protect themselves because it's just kind of startling. But also there's some other scarier animals who might make the hissing sound. So they're foraging in a bush and they hear a hiss. They might think, oh, that might be a snake. That might be something that's bad. Maybe I should avoid it. And then they'll also hiss to communicate with one another. So they'll hiss for breeding, or they'll hiss to say, hey, I'm the biggest, toughest cockroach. You don't want to mess with me. They hiss to communicate for a few different reasons. And the way they hiss is actually really cool. So you can see he has a little mouth right there, but he doesn't hiss using his mouth. So like you and I would probably hiss going, hiss, by blowing a little bit of air through our teeth, making that hissing sound. But what he does instead is he has these circular things on his body. You can kind of see them right there. They're called spiracles. And those spiracles are really small holes. And so he kind of does like a little crunch, and he pushes air really quickly out of those spiracles, and that creates that really loud hissing sound. So he can make a really loud sound despite being a pretty small bug. Does anyone have any questions about my friend Beethoven, the Madagascar hissing cockroach? Yeah, go ahead. Brenna? Oh, you gotta unmute yourself.
He looks very interesting.
Isn't he interesting? Yeah, like I said, he kind of looks a little scary at first. Like, I have to admit, when I first started working with them, I was a little nervous. But then I got to know them, and they are so sweet and so gentle and so cool.
At first, I thought it was a frog.
He's pretty big. He's probably the size of some of the frogs we have here in Wisconsin.
Cool.
Courtney?
Yeah.
Where are those roaches housed in the zoo? Are they in the reptile house? Where are they?
Yeah, they're in the Discovery Center, which is the other half of that herpetarium building. So we have two different colonies. We have an education colony that lives kind of behind the scenes. That's where this specific cockroach lives, Beethoven. But then we have a big colony that's in the Discovery Center where you can see the males and the females, and it's a breeding colony, so you can even see little babies that we have there.
Okay. Did you guys do research on these types of animals, or not so much?
We don't have any particular research with Madagascar hissing cockroaches. These guys are actually really, really well researched because they're super easy to house and they have a pretty quick turnaround time for reproduction. So a ton of universities use these guys for like basic animal behavior research, a lot of other stuff. So we don't really have a lot that we could bring to the table for Madagascar hissing cockroach research, but we do a lot of research for some of our other animals we have here at the zoo. It's a good question.
Cool.
Courtney?
Yeah.
Are they similar to the cockroaches that are all over in Florida?
They are related. They're all in the cockroach group, but these guys are different because they don't have wings. So these guys aren't the fast, skittery kind of guys that you may find in hotels in Florida. But these guys are the wingless, the flightless kind. And they're a little bit different too because they live in a very different part of the world. But they are all cockroaches, so they have that in common.
Yeah, he kind of looks cute. Those ones that I saw in Florida, they were cute.
I agree. I thought when I was in Florida, I was like, oh, I can handle a cockroach. I know what they look like. I hang out with them all the time. And then it moved on me, and I just wasn't ready for how fast and spooky it was. And I did not handle it well. But yeah, so he's pretty cute. All right, are you guys ready to see my next animal?
Yeah, I have one more question. How many cockroaches do you have?
One more time?
How many cockroaches do you have?
Oh, we have quite a bit. I don't know that I know an exact number, but thinking about all the little babies that live in the cockroach container, we probably have over like 200, maybe even 300. Quite a lot, and they're pretty prolific, so they have a lot of babies. And we have a very healthy colony of cockroaches. All right, let's bring out my next little animal friend. So this is my friend Louise.
Aww.
And Louise is an ornate box turtle. She's a little cutie too. So these guys actually have a really cool research story. Since you brought up research, I'll tell you a little bit about that. So ornate box turtles are native to Wisconsin. So you can actually find these guys here, but they are a threatened species in Wisconsin. So they're very rare. Their populations have been declining. So looking at Louise, you can probably tell just by looking at her that she's not quite similar to the pond turtles that you usually see here in Wisconsin. She's got a couple different things about her. You can see these long claws that are really good for digging. They're nice and curved, and her feet are really flat. And then you can see her domed shell. This would not be very aerodynamic in the water. So she's actually not a swimming turtle. She is a land turtle. So she hangs out in the land pretty much all the time. And so these guys actually live in a habitat called an oak savanna, kind of like a prairie ecosystem. It has some big oak trees on it. And we in Wisconsin and in a lot of the Midwest, we've turned a lot of these habitats, especially prairies, into cornfields because there's really good soil for growing crops. But you guys think Louise could really thrive in a cornfield? No, that's not her habitat. That doesn't have the resources she needs. So these guys once were pretty common, but because of how we modified our landscape, we saw a really big decline. And another unique thing about them is that turtles take a long time. They're not like cockroaches. They're not very prolific. They take a long time to become old enough to have babies. So when they hatch out of their eggs and when they're little baby turtles, really, really small, and they're really vulnerable to predators. Once they get to be about this size, they're pretty solid. She's got really great shell. She's really great at protecting herself, but they're very vulnerable when they're young. And so they have to grow up, survive all of that, and then be old enough to have babies. So it usually takes 3+ years before they're old enough to reproduce. So if we lose a lot of the adults in the population because of habitat loss, it becomes really, really hard for these turtles to be able to build up that population again because they can't just reproduce right away. They need to wait till they get old enough. What we did as part of a research project with the Wisconsin DNR is that we actually got to participate in some captive breeding for these guys. So the DNR went out and they found pockets of populations when these guys were in the endangered status, and they brought them to the zoo. And they also worked on protecting habitat because we can breed as many turtles as we want, but if they don't have a place to live, it's just not gonna work. So the DNR worked on making sure that we protected the habitat spaces that we had left. And then the zoo did our part in providing a safe place for the turtles to be able to breed and those baby turtles to be able to grow up. And conveniently, we live in the same habitat and ecosystem as them, so they were outside all the time. They didn't need that much extra attention from our keepers because this is kind of like their natural habitat. So really all we needed to do was supplement some food and make sure that they were safe from predators. But once we did that and we had enough to kind of give, the DNR worked with us and took those adult reproducing turtles and placed them back into those habitats that we knew were safe. And so because of that program has been pretty successful, we actually don't do it anymore because we want the turtles to be kind of doing it on their own in their natural habitats, and we don't see as much of a need because their population has gone back up. It's still in the threatened status, so it's not perfect. We're still working on making sure that they have the space that they need to be able to survive, but it's doing a lot better than endangered. So that's one way that the zoo got to participate in research, and that's something that a lot of different zoos do, specifically AZA accredited zoos, which is something that we are at Henry Vilas Zoo. It's the highest standard in animal care. So we get to participate in a lot of really cool research opportunities and do unique things that we could really only do in a zoo setting. So that's one way that we got to help protect these guys and got to work with local scientists to be able to help these guys out. And then the other thing that we get to do is teach people like you about how special and important these guys are and how we can share our space well. If we share our space and they have a home, then these guys can live on and we can all work together and kind of live in harmony if we make sure that we give animals space so that they can survive. Does anyone have any questions about Louise, the ornate box turtle?
I do, of course.
Go ahead.
What are their predators?
That's a good question. Things like raccoons are probably the #1 predator.
Okay.
Foxes might go after them, especially when they're little. There's a lot of things that could eat them or eat their eggs. So a lot of snakes. will eat them when they're little or eat their eggs for sure.
Yeah.
But I would say primarily raccoons would be the one that would really go after these guys.
When they're young and they're vulnerable, can raccoons and others eat their shells or? Well,
They're just because they're smaller, they're easier to kind of crack open. So the shell is made out of bone. So it's a great way to protect themselves. But when they're little, it's just smaller, so it's easier. And they're more vulnerable.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does he have a pointy beak for a reason or a nose?
Oh, good observation. You can see her little beakers. Yeah, so she does kind of have a beak. And we call it that. It's a beak. So she doesn't have any teeth. Instead, she has this sharp beak that she uses to get her food. So she is an omnivore. She likes to eat, her favorite food in the whole wide world is earthworms. So she likes to kind of suck those down like big old spaghetti noodles. That's her favorite food. So she uses that beak to munch down her food. Or she also is a plant eater as well. So she'll eat things like carrots or lettuce. So she needs her beak to put those into bite-sized pieces. So that beak helps her eat her food. Good observation.
Thank you.
We had a question come through. Somebody was asking about if Louise has had babies.
I don't know if Louise has ever had babies. She is one of our education animals, so she actually lives inside year-round. We do still have a few remaining ornate box turtles that live outside, kind of near the herpetarium. Those ones, I believe, we kind of just let them do their thing. If they do reproduce, they kind of take care of on their own. I don't know of any babies that we've had since I've worked here, but that'd be something I'd have to look up. That's a really good question.
Is that how big they get?
Yeah, she's an adult, so she is in her 20s, so she's pretty old. But they can live to be about 50 years old, so they can live a really long time. So they have that long livelihood where they can be reproducing for a long time, which is why they kind of have that strategy of wait till they're old and then they start reproducing, because then they can reproduce for the next 30 years, which is awesome. But if you take the adults out of the population, that becomes a problem. Yeah, she's full grown. She looks kind of small, but it's as big as she's gonna get. All right, you guys ready to meet my next animal friend?
Yeah.
Good job, Louise.
Are they all gonna be reptiles?
Well, the first one was an invertebrate. The next one was a reptile, and I will let you know that this next one is also a reptile. But my last one is a mammal. Right. So this is my friend Maisie, and Maisie is a red rat snake. So I heard a little ooh come out. That's understandable. Sometimes snakes definitely make people feel a little nervous. But you should know, even if you don't want to be hanging out with a snake like I am, snakes are so important and so special. Have any of you ever had a mouse or a rat in your house before? Yeah, it happens. It's not great. Mice and rats can get into our homes. They can eat our food. They can cause diseases. They can cause a lot of problems. And that's exactly what Maisie the red rat snake likes to eat, is mice and rats. So snakes actually really help people out by helping control that population, because we don't want to say every single mice and rat is bad and they should all die, because they do serve a purpose too. They're important. But if there's too many of them, if they're overpopulated, that's where it causes a lot of problems for people and for wildlife. So what snakes do is they help keep the balance. So snakes are excellent predators. She is so good at finding her food, eating up those mice and rats, but she's not going to eat every single mice and rat that's ever existed. She's going to help restore that balance and make sure that everything's kind of working together. So she has a couple really cool adaptations that help her eat mice and rats. So you might see her sticking out her little tongue.
Oh, yeah.
She's sticking her tongue out. She's what she's doing is she's smelling. So they have a special organ in their body called the Jacobson organ. And that Jacobson organ allows them to take particles in the air using their tongue, put it in that special part of their head and their brain, and be able to sense the world around them using that Jacobson organ. So they can smell, there might be food over here, or oh, there might be food over there. So that's kind of how she's kind of sensing the world around her, figuring out where I am, figuring out where her food is, figuring out where predators might be. And the other cool thing that snakes can do is you can see her head's actually pretty small, right? She's got a cute little head. And you can see she's showing really well right now. The thickest part of her body is pretty big. And that's the biggest thing she can eat, is something that's the thickest part of her body. So there's quite a difference between her head and that part of her body. So what she does, she can open her mouth really wide. When we open our mouths, you can feel we have a tension right here. That's where our mouths and jaws are hinged together, which is really good for us. But for snakes, they can actually unhinge their jaw. So they can open it up, and they have really, really stretchy skin in their head. So they can open it up really wide, and they can also open it up this way. So if you feel your little chinny chin, you can feel there's a little fusion right in your jawbone. So that's where our bone is fused together, which again, that's good for us. But snakes don't have that. So instead, they can actually open their mouth that way too. So they can open up this way and this way, to open up super wide and be able to swallow their food whole. Because you probably notice she doesn't have any arms or legs. So she can't use a fork or a knife or anything to chop it up into little pieces. She has to eat it all in one really big bite. So she swallows it whole, and she eats one really big meal. So here at the zoo, we feed her a couple mice, as much as she goes for until she says she's full. So usually, I think last time I saw her get fed, it was about 3 mice. And then she doesn't eat for another 2 weeks. So they have one really, really big meal. And then because they're reptiles and because they are cold-blooded, they don't have this little furnace in their tummy like you and I do, where we're constantly burning up our calories and food and turning it into heat. Instead, they digest, and their metabolism is super slow. So she eats that huge meal and then slowly works on digesting it for the next few weeks. And then she's ready to eat again in about 2 weeks. So they eat very different from us. So you can see how that would help keep the balance.
Do you feed her live mice?
We don't feed her live mice. So typically for most animals in managed care, we give them frozen mice that we kind of warm up, and then we feed them with tongs. So if you think about in the wild, if she was hunting a mouse, if that mouse kind of got away from her, it would just kind of run away and it wouldn't be trapped in with her. If we put a live mouse in her enclosure, the mouse could actually really hurt her because they're kind of stuck together. There's no way for that mouse to get away. And there's no way for her to get away. So even though she's a pretty fierce predator, it could actually do a lot more damage than it would do good. And also, we really want to, when I handle her, I want her to know that I am not food. And when I come in, that doesn't mean that food's coming in. So the way that we feed them is very specific. So we feed them with specific tongs, and they know that that means food, and that hands and people going in their enclosure does not mean food. So people a lot of times ask me, are you scared that she's going to bite you? But I am not really scared, because snakes in general, they won't just try to eat me. Like, she can't eat me. It wouldn't make sense for her to try to do that. So she'd really only do it if she was feeling super scared. And she'd tell me a lot of things before that. So with snakes, you can really feel in their body. So as I'm holding her right now, she is super relaxed. She's really comfortable. So if you think about your fist, if you tighten your fist really tight, you can feel your muscles really tighten up. If you feel how smushy, loose your muscles are, I can feel that in her body. So if she's telling me, tense, 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 I'm feeling nervous, I'm going to put her away, because she's saying, I don't feel comfortable. I don't want to hang out right now. I don't want to force her to do that, because if I were to say, nope, you're doing this thing that you're really scared of, that's how I'd end up getting bitten. But I listen to those behaviors first when she's saying, I'm feeling comfortable, or I'm feeling a little nervous. I'll put her away right away. All right, we're almost out of time, so I want to get to our last animal. You guys can say bye to little Maisie, and then give me just a moment as I get our last animal ready.
Does she ever get tangled?
Get tangled sometimes, especially I have to be careful when I handle her. She's not tangled, she's really windy, but she'll tangle me up. So if I try to hold her with both hands, sometimes we call it getting handcuffed. She'll accidentally be tight, and then she'll be around both my hands, and then I can't move very well. So I always make sure when I handle her, she's always around one arm. And that keeps me safe. But she knows where her whole body is, so it's not like she would get herself stuck in a knot. The only thing I worry about is if she got me kind of tangled up. All right, I got my last animal friend here, and if you guys remember, I said it was mammal. Handling gloves on here. All right. So here's our last animal. It's a hedgehog. This is my friend Drake, and he is an African pygmy hedgehog, and he is feeling just a little nervous right now, but I kind of just woke him up. So these guys are nocturnal, which means they are awake at nighttime and sleeping during the day. So he was just snoozing, and I just picked him up, so he's kind of going, huh, what's going on? And you can see his amazing defense mechanism of having these pokey quills all over his body and being able to curl up into a ball. Not a lot of animals can actually curl up like this. This is a pretty special adaptation that hedgehogs have. And you can see it's pretty effective, because I would not imagine as a predator that I would ever want to take a bite of him when he's curled up like this. It's super sharp, super pokey. But as he's kind of getting more comfortable, you can already see his little nosey sticking out. He's sniffing. Aww. He's kind of just making sure, oh, where am I? Am I safe? Is this a good place? So he'll kind of sniff around and start walking on my hands in just a second as he gets more comfortable. There he is. So these guys have a really, really excellent sense of smell. So you can see that's the first thing he's kind of doing is sniffing around. They've got good hearing and good eyesight, but sense of smell is really how they navigate the world around them, and to be able to figure out if they're safe, kind of what's going on. You can also see he's got those little hedgehog eyebrows that are really good at protecting his face. They look pretty charismatic, but actually have a good function of making sure that his little face is protected by quills. But these guys are really cute and really fun to work with. They just get a little bit snoozy during the day. And now that he's kind of uncoiling a little bit, you can see that he does have fur, as most mammals do. He's got hair all over his body, and these quills are just modified versions of hair. So they're made out of the same thing that our hair and fingernails are made out of. They're made out of keratin. So they're just really sharp and pokey, serving as a great way for him to protect himself from predators. Does anyone have any questions about him? Sorry, we're running a little short on time.
Courtney, did you say where they're from?
Yeah, these guys are from Africa. I can't remember what specific regions, but they like to live in kind of like scrubland, brushland areas. They're called hedgehogs because they do like to live kind of near hedges. That's kind of their habitat. So similar for these guys, they like to live in that kind of bushy brushland area. There you can see he's really awake.
Oh, it's adorable.
How long do they live?
Oh, that's another good question. I'm not 100% sure the answer to that. I want to say they can live to be like 10 or 15, but I'd have to double check that. These guys are just over a year old, so
just adorable.
And you can see if he kind of opens up his mouth a little bit, he's got actually pretty sharp teeth because he is an insectivore. He likes to eat insects. He's also will eat some fruits and veggies too, but he's got a sharp little insect eating teeth.
That is adorable.
You can see his little nose moving. That's how he navigates the world, sniffing around. What are you doing, buddy?
Oh, he looks way bigger once he's uncoiled.
Yeah, he gets a lot longer.
Yeah. Wow.
And you can see how well he managed to curl up into a ball. So they really can like fully turn into a ball, which is not something a lot of other animals could do. Other animals will like hide themselves, but he can like tuck in, and tuck in all of his limbs, which is really good adaptation.
What other animals are they related to? What other species?
That's a good question. Hedgehogs are in their own little hodgepodge group of mammals called insectivores, which is has a lot of different odds and ends mammals. A lot of times people think these guys are like rodents, but they are pretty different. Even though they kind of look like they'd be rodents with their little bulgy eyes, they're in that insectivore group. All right, any other questions? he is choosing to go to the bathroom right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and put him down. Don't want to get that all over the laptop. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining me. I'm so glad we got to do this.
Thank
if you
you.
have any questions or anything like that, I'd be happy to stick on the call for a bit.
Thank you. It was great.
Thanks for coming.
It was really wonderful. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Well, Stephanie, I believe I'll be sending you a survey about the program. These are still relatively new programs, so any feedback you have for me would be really great. But thanks for joining us today, guys. Hope you had fun.
Yeah,
thank you so much for taking the time. It was really great.
Great. Well, if nobody has any other questions, I think we're good. Have a good day, guys.
Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.